Hi and welcome back to Mystery Systems. Today we will be having a look on how you can make route redistribution between OSPF and EIGRP. Sorry from the spelling, it's pretty hard to pronounce, I think so. But yeah, I want to show you how you can do this by exchanging these routes into each other. So the EIGRP knows about the OSPF routes and vice versa, that OSPF knows about the other routes that EIGRP has. This is just a brief overview of my environment that I have chosen again to use in Packet Tracer. It's easy this way. I don't have really that access to all this hardware, so it's easy to make here in Packet Tracer. First off, we will start with router 1. I have given it the host name as usual, the IP addresses on the interface, started the OSPF process and advertising some networks. A new command that I've just been putting in this time was just an autocost reference bandwidth command, which just does that. It prefers the 1 gigabit links. Then router 2 has the host name, IP addresses on the interfaces. I've just made loopback interfaces on router 2 with some IP addresses. It's an easy way to just get a couple more networks that can be advertised into my OSPF process on R2. And as you can see, same goes here. I've made the autocost, a router ID, and as I talked about, the passive interface very good at the start. You can see some of my OSPF videos where I go a bit in depth of what the passive interface does. Just shuts down for hellos, and so you don't advertise hellos out to your interfaces and you don't want to receive them. That's a quick thing about it. And I advertise these loopback addresses here as into the OSPF process. R3 has hostname, IP addresses on its interfaces, and it has got loopback addresses again to advertise more networks into its EIGRP process, which will come down to right here because we have both made EIGRP and OSPF on it. And the EIGRP configuration I'll talk about right now. Something that you have to mind is if you are making these on more routers with EIGRP, this number here is an AS number, not a process number as in OSPF. So that would say that you can have this process 1 on this router 3 that we have over here in OSPF, and you can have a different process ID on R2. You could, for instance, call this 10 on R2. This doesn't make anything with the configuration or anything about the adjacency, neighborship, because this is just a simple process ID in OSPF. So that can be different. But if you're making EIGRP, this is an autonomous system number. So this has to be the same on the routers that you would like this to work on. Just do mind that when you're making with EIGRP. I have made, of course, the configuration inside of it, and the passive interface default is the same as about OSPF. You do not want to advertise or receive anything about EIGRP on interfaces, so you do not want to form adjacencies on these interfaces, on all the interfaces that it has. And I then choose that I would actually do want to use EIGRP on this interface, and I'm giving it a simple router ID. Now we have come to the redistribution, and we would like to redistribute OSPF into EIGRP. For us to do this, we have to set a metric for this OSPF, because EIGRP and OSPF does not use the same metrics. OSPF uses cost and EIGRP uses bandwidth and delay. So they have two forms of how they determine the best route and uses different algorithms to find out the best route. With that said, I would just like to briefly show you this command to redistribute OSPF into EIGRP. First you gotta set a metric, and this is in kilobits per second, so I set it to 1,000,000, which equals 1 gigabit. And I have set the this is in microseconds, the delay of 1. After, you have to determine how reliable this path is, and I have said this is 100% reliable. This is a number from 0 to 250, where the higher number is the best. After we got the load, After we got the load, and I've specified that 1, where you got a number from, I think it's 1 to 255 as well. It is, and the lower the better. So this is just how much load there is on the path. And the last thing is the MCU packet, and I have just set a default of 1500 MTU packet. At last, I advertised the loopback addresses on the loopback interfaces on router 3, which is here. Now at last we come to the Uspf configuration with a process ID of 1, as I've made it on the other routers, and on R3 here. I use the out of cast reference bandwidth. I want to prioritize, and I use gigabit links. A route ID has been set, the passive interface command has been done, and I want to have no passive interface on this interface, and the redistribution of EIGRP of the AS number 1, and I want to use a metric type of 1. I will just talk about that, and I will describe it for you when we come to the show IP route command, where I show you that they have learned the different routes. And the subnets as last, this just does that it wants to receive classful subnetting and classless subnetting. And at last, the advertisement of the OSPF network that it has. You might have thought of the layout of this ABR and ASBR. The ABR I talked about with, I had OSPF multi-area. This is just an router that knows about 2 OSPF areas. An ASBR, this is OSPF minded. An ASBR in OSPF is a router that knows different routing protocols than just OSPF. So this is the router that stands like between the 2 routing protocols, as this router does. That makes it an ASBR because it knows about the EIGRP routes and the OSPF routes. As you can see here with the command show IP route on router 1, I have learned the external type routes, which is the loopback addresses of router 3 over in EIGRP. I have learned its local area network as well. This 10.2.2.2.0 as well. I want to talk about the metric type that I actually set. There is an E2 and an E1. Per default, if you set a metric type, which, let me just put it up. If you set just, and do not text this in, it just takes a default of 2. Can be bad. There's, yeah, you decide for yourself, but I think it's better to get the 1, and I'll tell you why. If you have an E2 and the routes come from EIGRP, then it will only calculate the link's cost to the next router. So if this link was a 0 link, it will keep the same 0 link cost throughout the whole network. So that can actually be very slow if you make just the default external type 2 metric type. But if you have an E1, it will actually calculate the cost for each link, which OSPF is very good at. Well, I originally didn't plan that I actually had to add a 4 router or another router in, but I had to for showing you that EIGRP knows about the external routes as well. And I couldn't do that on Offree because Offree already knows about both routing protocols. So that means that the external routes of another routing protocol does not come in its show IP route. But I added R4, as you can see here, in the same network segment here as R3 is pushing out on its gigabit interface, and I just put R4 in the same network as R3. As you can see here on R4, we have external routes that has been learned from outside of EIGRP. So this is our OSPF routes. As you can see, we have our loopback addresses, and we have local network segment, and we have the small point-to-point network here that EIGRP knows about right now as well. I just want to show you that the configuration that I done to offer, this is the simple configuration that I put into it to make this happen. So we could have that it knows about the routes. And then I had to do a little adjustment on R3. I just have to put this command in its routing EIGRP RS number. So as I talked about, because these R4 won't form any adjacencies with R3 since this interface originally as I planned before, but so that has to be put on so they can form an neighborship, and that's about it. I know it's a bit confusing at the end here, but I did a little small adjustment so I could show you that EIGRP knew about the other external routes. I will be putting the configuration down in the video as well, so you can just make this setup as it is right now, so there's no confusing thing about it. I hope to see you in my next video, and I'm sorry for this video became pretty long, but I hope that's okay. Bye.